All right. Thank you, Alyssa, and thank you, Be Original. We really appreciate the opportunity always to be invited back. It's so important to connect with the kind of next generation of designers. I think it's something we wish we had more exposure to when we were at that stage of our, not even careers, but more of our kind of journeys as students. As Alyssa just mentioned, and we spoke about this a little bit last year, our history is a very important part of who we are. But this year, we thought it would be interesting to give you a look under the hood and learn more about our collaborative process and how products come together and evolve from conception to sellable and marketable finished product in very much kind of a team effort that goes far beyond Daniel, Nick, and myself. When I was thinking about this talk, one thing, and I think this is a pretty obvious statement, but Cerno's journey, which started with nothing more than an idea, very much follows the same trajectory that each product does when we're developing it. You kind of dream up the concept, think about it, and then figure out how to build it. And we can next. Thanks. As I just mentioned, and Alyssa mentioned, this friendship is so important. Daniel, Nick, and I, long before business partner was even part of the equation, there was a friendship that surrounded around building things. And through that, we got to form a trust, a respect for one another, and now a respect for our entire team, and really a belief in one another. And when you get into the business partner side of it, that's so important, knowing when to defer to everyone's kind of area of focus. And we can move on to the next slide. Thank you. So being vertically integrated, meaning that we have raw materials coming into this building and finished product going out, facilitates this amazing opportunity for continuous feedback, and which also equates to continuous improvement. And I mean it when I say everyone in this building has a voice. So inside sales, customer service, operations, obviously engineering, design, the entire production team. So the metal shop, wood shop, assembly. And often this leads to great improvements really early on in the phase when we're just kind of in the conception or proof of concept or early prototyping phase. But then the beauty of being so vertical also allows us, where maybe 2 years into developing a product, and this happened recently, something we've been actually making for about 10 years. And one of our veterans in the wood shop kind of said, why don't we try this? And it led to a huge improvement that increased material yield and cut down on time a lot. So we really value being so vertical. We think it allows for the intent of the design to be preserved through the entire process. Next, please. We grew up, all three of us together, since we were really young boys in Laguna Beach, California. It's a beautiful area. You've got the coastal mountains and the ocean right there. It taught us all to not only fall in love with nature and being outside, but also to respect it. In the really early days of starting a business, especially when we were getting started 12 years ago, it was hard to make that a priority. As we've grown, it's become more of a priority. And fortunately, because of the vertical integration, we are inherently quite sustainable. We pay a ton of attention to material yields and purchasing things responsibly. But I think most importantly, above all else, we build products to last. We're trying to build something that has extremely high quality, a ton of integrity, and keep it out of the landfill. And if that is your only sustainable thing you're doing, it might be the most important. So I would just say, if you're thinking about starting a company or even developing a single product, just having that in front of mind from the beginning. It's a lot easier if you make it a part of your original business model. rather than trying to incorporate it in several years in. On the next slide, I want to talk about how we decide what we're going to build next. And this is really getting into more of the process of conceiving and taking it through, which Daniel and Nick will talk to you about in a moment. It's challenging, and we're often pulled in multiple directions because we love the entire process of dreaming things up and building them and designing them. But it's important to remember that you are running a business. So when we get to this phase, we're trying to decide, we try to have one primary product in the development pipeline at a time. It doesn't mean there's not a lot in the queue, but as far as what we're working on and trying to get to market next is usually a single product or a small family of product. And we're trying to decide between sconce, pendant, floor lamp. Is this going to be a more of a fashion statement piece, or is it going to be more of a market performance driven product? And then we have to determine the target price point, target customer, a lot of engineering and design questions about cleanability, if it's going to end up in a healthcare space versus different requirements if it's going to end up in a hospitality, commercial, or residential. So at this stage, all of those questions are being asked and answered to kind of kick off the new product development process. On the next slide, and this photo is really fun for me, this was our first trade show. We were extremely green, naive. I think the beauty of it and the products you see with us, there were some furniture pieces and some lighting pieces as well, speak to being outside of any real sphere of influence. At that stage, and I think it's probably the stage that a lot of you are at, it's really liberating. I mean, you are kind of not chasing any trends. You're not necessarily chasing extreme growth or sustainability. You're designing based on learning about the new technology. For us, that was LEDs, just emerging as a new technology and embracing it. And it's really exciting. As things grow, and on the next slide, this is just a busy chart with a lot of lines. I took out a lot of the meaningful data, but what it represents is families of product over the course of several months and how many units are selling. As you can see, it's an ebb and flow, but it's really important once you have customer feedback and you actually have sales data to listen to it and to respond to it. I wouldn't say it should be the single driver of what you do next. Then you might get caught just chasing your last success, which is very much not what we do. But our customers, our sales reps, our team, and then this type of data is hugely influential. It also is an invaluable tool for production and purchasing to understand what type of raw materials we need to be keeping, in stock so we can never run out, which, as anyone who's been reading the news lately knows, is a very real problem that's facing almost every manufacturer across the globe. On the next slide, this is, it was a few years back, and you can see our hair is different lengths. But just a reminder that this collaboration, I know it makes me better. At the beginning, when we were less experienced and we might have stood behind our, if it were a disagreement, argument a little bit more of it, we've gotten to a point now where I really think there is no ego, and that doesn't mean there's no confidence in what we're doing. But really, I think we're more porous and we listen and we understand that usually the end result, when you make room for listening and bouncing ideas off, is a lot better. And for all of us, and we actually thought of inviting more people from our team to join this call so you could hear from some of the engineers and design, but they are quite busy out there right now. But I think everyone could speak to just the benefit of the collaborative process. And I really encourage it. And that doesn't mean that great work can't happen in a vacuum and that parts of our process don't. They 100% do. but knowing when to bring in that feedback. And as I said a moment ago, I think almost every time it creates a better product. Moving on to the next slide, I spoke to it briefly earlier. We try to have, every year our goal is to introduce 12 new forms or families or products. So roughly once a month, and Daniel will talk to you about it in a moment. That might mean a couple thousand SKUs, but as far as just distilling it down to the form, about one a month. And we try to balance the statement fashion pieces and kind of the market driven. As creatives and designers and builders, it's always fun to chase the challenge and chase what's really, really difficult. And I think it's important for our own growth as a design company to pursue some of the more challenging creative endeavors. But you got to remember you're running a business, and that needs to be a balancing act between the stuff that the customers are asking for daily, and then something like this where we just really did go off and create something that spoke to us. And so far it's been out there for several years and it's worked well. One important note about that is the amount of marketing efforts that are going to go into the kind of more fashion statement piece versus a more market driven is extreme. So for something like this, we are going to be doing multiple photo shoots, creating a ton of photography, a ton of digital assets, videos, press releases, trying to get it out to the world, creating a lot of samples and education materials for our extended sales network, where on the next slide, the Una is something that we developed recently. And this is, I think it's beautiful in its simplicity and the minimalist design, and it works extremely well with an uplight and downlight. But this was a response to popular demand. A lot of our customers were saying, we love some of your more curved, small wood linear pendants, but can we just have a straight one? It is not the most novel design out there, but it has been received extremely well. And again, it was our internal sales team and our external sales network telling us, hey, we're getting asked for this all the time. So that's what we made for them. At this stage, before we pass it on to really the engineering team, and it's more in the early stages, we're thinking about everything regarding the price, target audience, how we're going to market it to them, what literature needs to support it, and then engineering and design in parallel is creating all the more technical information. I know I just threw quite a bit of information at you guys. The goal, today is to speak again to how important this collaboration is, and also just kind of give a bit of a reality check of what it takes to bring these products to market. I am happy to answer any questions at the end during the Q&A. And then after that, if you have a question you think of, feel free to reach out to me or Daniel or Nick. We are here and love speaking with all designers that we can. So yeah, thank you very much again to all of you for joining and already paying attention to the importance of original design. And thanks Be Original. And I'm gonna introduce my, again, lifelong friend, business partner, Nick Sheridan, Director of Design.
Hello, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Nick Sheridan, Director of Design, and my background is in architecture. And it was in architecture school where I really fell in love with modernism and modern design. It's a huge inspiration for me still today. Design greats like Le Corbusier and Mies van der Rohe, they still truly inspire me. And when I was learning about their work in architecture school, it was a really transformational experience. And aesthetically, modernism has a huge influence over how we design our fixtures today. And in this next slide, you can see maybe there's the really small, there's the definition of Cerno. Cerno means to resolve in Latin. And it was in architecture school when you would present your project that no matter what, my teacher would always say, this element or that element wasn't resolved, you need to go resolve that. So that's what we aim to do, really, is to resolve each design fully. It's our guiding light. So today I'm going to walk through the Amicus design. It's a pendant we launched fairly recently. And next, we're just going to show you a quick video. And after that, I'm going to get a little more into the design process.
I've always been pretty interested in different kind of tessellating patterns, but also adding a certain growth to them or tweaking something over a distance. Back when I was in architecture school, I used to draw these huge drawings that had repeating patterns to them. And there's something really powerful and beautiful when you're able to zoom in and out and see a pattern repeat on itself. With the Amicus, we were able to use real brass, and that quality of material really shows through. And the wood itself being solid stock, full dimensional lumber that we hand select each board that's used, it really comes through in the final product. We're constantly challenging ourselves with pushing the envelope and trying new methods, exploring new forms, working the design process just to see where it might lead. The Amicus is really a great example of that ambition that we have here at Cerno.
So yeah, and this is an image of the Amicus. That was a little story about how parts of the design process very quick snapshot of some of the things that we were interested in as far as like pattern and how that was generated. But as I mentioned, constantly trying to come up with new forms, new designs, and also new methods and materials. And this is really a departure of a lot of our standard ways of doing things, which, as Brett mentioned, it's a challenge, but it's really what kind of turns us on about coming to work and solving problems. So the Amicus is this long journey. It really shows the teamwork required. So in this next slide, you can see one of the very first sort of kernels of idea that led to the Amicus. This was over a year before we even started working on anything that resembled the Amicus. We had just purchased a laser cutter, and I was thinking about how do I cut something in 2 dimensions and turn it into a 3-dimensional form. Didn't resolve how the seams were going to get put together. You can see I tried to use solder. It made a huge mess. In a lot of ways, it turned out terribly, but there was something beautiful about the form generation and how it went from a 2D cut pattern on the laser to this 3D form. So while we have our certain design focus at any one point, we also really try to take time to just test things out and go see for ourselves about different design ideas, partial ideas, just things that might be turned into something else, so that the dead ends are actually worthwhile. That's a big piece of advice. This was set aside for over a year, and it kind of came back, and it turned into what became the Amicus. So you can see in this next slide, well over a year after, so this next slide, this is the shape that was cut to create the Amicus, or that dome that you just saw. Now, to create this geometry that's in AutoCAD, I have made a really quick video that shows how I generated that in Rhino, this next slide. So super rudimentary. It's an old version of Rhino. We tend to think that ingenuity and creativity really is the important part. We don't often rely on really, cutting edge software pieces. So here it's a circle and a spline and a little segment of a line to create the profile of the shape that we're looking for. Take that profile and extrude it a little bit, and then again in Rhino, just array that around the central point, and that helps to define the geometry of one petal. So then come in here and able to trim the excess, and then from here just erase all the other petals. And this is again arrayed around the central point, and in the software I'm able to flatten it. So there's that shape. So that's just a little peek behind the scenes on how it's a really simple process to get that flattened shape from Rhino that created that first rough, super crude object. Here like I was saying, over a year later, after spending a lot of time thinking about how to resolve the seam, the soldering certainly wasn't working. And then also I had 4 or 5 years prior, I'd done some travels in Morocco, had been really taken with their spheres and domes that have these perforated patterns to them. And they have this kind of porosity where you can actually see through them a little bit. It was really beautiful. So I kind of thought it would be nice to have a modern take on that. And so again, as a kind of test design, outside of the main focus of development, created this quick prototype, hung it in the studio, off to the side, not even with the light bulb in it. And at the conclusion of one of our design meetings, where we were actually pushing things forward, we all kind of remarked on it, thought there was something there. Initial quick, collaborative discussion about feasibility, manufacturing wise, Brett weighing in on just the market and if that's a category that we're looking to fill at the moment. And we all agreed there was something there, and we wanted to pursue something there. So I took input, what sort of concerns that I needed to address, ideas to apply, different directions to take for design. And so in this next slide, you can see this is a second pattern that was created, and also tried to further resolve the way that the seam was actually getting stitched together. And so this was presented with a simple light bulb inside of it, and we discussed it as a team. And at that point, we stand at a whiteboard up here in the design lab and really mull over lots of different options and different details to the design, and collaborate, from an engineering standpoint, from a sales and marketing and understanding the customer standpoint, and then, me trying to preserve the design intent, what I think is kind of beautiful about the design. And it's here where we really start to talk about the options. So the lamping, the sizes, and the finishes. So in this next slide, you can see this is the fixture over a bar. And so start to think about, where does this fixture go? What kind of space is it used in? Is it used in multiples? Is there a cluster of them? How big can we make it? How heavy does it get when it's made really large? From a lamping standpoint, is it going to have an integrated LED? In this case, we got a integrated glass globe, but we also offer it with just a medium base socket, just a light bulb. And then finishes. We love to offer different finishes, and we at least kind of have a hard time deciding which finishes to include and which ways we should pair them together. And it's a really big discussion point, but also like the longevity of the finish and the repeatability of the finish. Just a ton of conversations on the engineering of how the seam is actually being put together. Very fluid at this point. There's a lot of R&D, there's a lot of work on everybody's part about where we should steer the ship. And in this next slide, you can see, because we like the second pattern so much, we went ahead and made a third pattern. We didn't like this one. This one we thought was not good, and we really, at that point, finalized the second pattern was the one that we were going to move forward with. And that's just a story about, it's hard to really know when to stop certain explorations. And that's a big lesson. So at this point, we figured out the really large size to make, kind of triangulated between the smallest ones that I'd been prototyping and the large one, and made it a medium size. We went with 3 different sizes, and how are they all lamped? How much lumens do we need to get out of them? So it's very much the 3 of us collaborating on understanding what attributes to put into this design. So a lot of strategy at the very outset of the design, which is still where we're at this point. In this next slide, you can see this is the Amicus 21 top wood hub. So we wanted to add this wood element. We wanted to bring some warmth into it, and just the thickness of the wood, the way the wood was going to get glued up, and the edge profile. There was a ton of development just there. So we really want to resolve every design detail. And then here you can see that there's a cable suspension. This is a really large fixture. It's quite heavy. It's the 3 cable suspensions resists the fixture from spinning, which is something we talk about. On the left, you can see the socket sticking out the top. On the right, there's that glass globe on the inside. And then from an engineering standpoint, there's a ton of things figured out on how that's actually the hub. That's where everything comes together, and how we ship it and how it comes apart. And there's a multitude of different details that Dan will get into, some of which really take a lot of time. And then this next slide, you'll see, so that center image of the flower kind of shape, that's how I'd been prototyping all of the amicus. I cut one single large piece of metal and kind of stitched the seams together. And I rarely got one to come out perfect. The laser is not perfect. It would lose the cut occasionally, have small errors. And so as an engineering input to say, hey, we need to cut each petal separately and fasten those to a central hub. It's an extra step in some ways, but it was the only way we were going to get perfect product and not have to throw away all that laser time and all those, if you just have a small little error, you have to throw away a large piece of metal. So that's an important kind of engineering input that's occurred. So in this next slide, you can see this is final product, in context. At this point, we have 3 different size amicuses with multiple different material options and lamping, and we build a number of them and start to take photographs, but we really just kind of started the process in some ways. We've got a huge amount of marketing and sales assets to create, photo shoots. And then from an engineering standpoint, there's just a huge amount of documentation, and we need to introduce it to all of our craftspeople who will be actually building these objects, which Dan will get into more. But that was just a quick run through of kind of in chronology of the process from my perspective. And again, this is not the end. Sometimes it feels like the end, like we have this beautiful product, but we have to continue on a lot further, which again, Daniel Wacholder will get into now. And again, please enter your questions and we will answer those at the end of the presentation. Thank you.
All right, well, yeah, I'm Dan Wacholder, the Engineering and Operations Director. So yeah, as Nick kind of spoke to, throughout the whole process, engineering's job is kind of to be the reality check. When you're conceiving something and you're kind of in that exciting creative part, it's easy to kind of lose sight of reality or of some of the things that might hold you back and that might result in problems down the road. So during the design process, even from the very beginning, it's really powerful for Nick and I to discuss these designs and for me to kind of be that reality check. The challenge is not, you don't want to throw water on the fire and kind of ruin everybody's enthusiasm by pointing all the things out that could go wrong and the problems that we're going to have. So it's a balancing act between doing that and still kind of supporting pushing the boundaries and doing these creative things. But if you don't do it early, it's a lot worse, because if you get all the way down the line, you're really excited about something and then you realize you can't make it, or it won't fit through a door, or you can't get the material that it's made out of. That's much better to find that out later. So a really important thing to kind of keep in mind is making one of something is very, very different from being able to make many of something reliably for many years to come. So when you're purely in the creative mode, it's easy to kind of make one, figure it out, make it work, find a piece of material that you have and make it do what you want. But we've fallen in that trap before, where we make one of something and it comes out great and we're all excited, and then we try to do it again, we can't repeat it. So that's kind of a critical part, is just thinking, that making one of something does not mean you can make a lot of something. So yeah, I'm just going to take you through some of the kind of the thoughts that are going through my mind as we're going through these things, or through the engineering department's mind as we're going through these processes. A specific thing to think about a lot is material selection. The question is, is this material available in the quantities you need? Oftentimes we'll get all excited about a material only to find that it's only available if we buy an entire container full. or it takes 6 months to get more of the material, or the manufacturer that makes it, there's only one manufacturer, and what happens if they go out of business. So being really cautious about the materials that you integrate into a product, making sure that you have a reliable source for them and that they're available in a reasonable lead time. So if the Amicus, for instance, we stuck with materials we already had a source for. We were already stocking the brass material for other products, the wood we're using in other products, the canopy components and everything. Those are all well-known products. We weren't taking unnecessary risks by trying to integrate something new that we didn't understand how to get. That same applies to process selection. So is new equipment or tooling needed to make something? And that's not to say you can't go there, but just make sure you understand the implications of making a design decision that might result in, if you choose to make something, say you decide something that can only be made by injection molding, you might be paying $50,000 for a tool. And is that part of your product development budget? It might be, but it might not be. So sticking with making sure you understand the processes and the tooling required. And in this case, again, with the Amicus, we were leveraging the laser cutter, which we already had, the woodworking equipment, which we already had. So we were pushing the boundaries of design without taking unnecessarily risks by introducing new processes and new materials that we didn't understand. So again, those are just, I guess one other important one would be the repairability of a product. Something to think about early on, repairability and replacement parts. Making design decisions, is this something that you want to be able to fix in the field? What happens if a customer gets it and it's damaged in shipping? Can it be fixed at all? What if they install it and they cut the suspension cables too short? Can they replace the suspension cables without needing a whole new product? So all those thoughts kind of are going through, that's the kind of the engineering mindset that is in the room during the creative process, trying to just, not kill the enthusiasm, but make sure we're not making mistakes. So on the next slide, this is another important thing to just kind of realize. This is the SKU builder for the Amicus 21, one of the 3 sizes. And I know you probably can't read it all, but the point being this list the option choices that we've made. So in this case, we chose 6 materials. There's 6 shade materials, 3 different wood finishes, and 3 lamping options. So not a lot of options, but just with that amount of options, we've already gotten to 54 unique SKUs. So that's 54 unique items we need to make part numbers for, we need to make bills of materials for. If we're going to stock any finished goods, we're talking about now holding inventory of 54 different items. When you factor in the 3 different sizes of Amicuses that we make, there's 162 unique SKUs. So from engineering perspective, the number of SKUs greatly impacts the complexity of launching a product and the amount of investment we're going to have to make in managing it moving forward. So that's a real important thing to just make sure it's sometimes very easy to get taken with, oh, this finish is so great and this one's so great and I like this size. What if we made one a little bit smaller? If you do too much of that, you make a gigantic pile of work from an engineering perspective. So you have to choose wisely and understand the implications of offering options. For us, this is one of the main benefits we see out of manufacturing everything in-house, and kind of some of the manufacturing processes, the build to order nature of our business allows us to offer these options without having to have, warehouses full of all the unique SKUs. So moving on to the next SKU, another real important thing to realize, the next slide, is this is a bill of materials. Bill of materials basically just lists all of the materials and the quantities needed to make a given product. Every SKU needs a bill of materials. And you can see the Amicus, it's a pretty simple product by our standards. There's not a lot going on, but still this long list, those are all the unique items that you need to make this. each of those items has to have a drawing, it has to have a source for it, has to have a part number. So just another thing to realize that some things that might seem simple during the design creative process, when you actually work it all out, they can grow in complexity. But without a good bill of materials and without good documentation like this, it's very hard to reliably build something. So moving on to the next slide. This is some other examples of just some of the production documentation that we need. So Nick mentioned we've got this beautiful thing, we know how to make it, we like it, but now we have to communicate that to our whole team. And that requires a lot of documentation, a lot of drawings. On the left, you see just one of our bill of materials kind of exploded drawings. It helps the team members identify what parts are supposed to go into a product. And then on the right is one of our kind of internal production guides that outlines the whole process about how to put these things together. And that's a huge amount of work. Sometimes it's more work than creating the design itself, but without it, unless Nick's gonna build these all, no one else is gonna be able to do it reliably. So something to realize has to happen. The next slide shows another often overlooked thing is packaging. Packaging is, for certain products, is more challenging than engineering the product. It's figuring out how to get it somewhere safely in one piece. That's also critical to be thought about early in the design process. You know, again, I mentioned earlier, can it fit through a door? We've had custom things we've been asked to quote. The designers send us drawings of some beautiful things, and then we ask the question, how wide is the door into this space? And realize that unless this thing comes apart in pieces, you're never going to get it in the door, or that won't fit on a truck. So if you're going to get it there, we're going to have to change the design. So packaging is critical. It's often a make or break it type of situation. If you do all this wonderful work and it arrives broken, it's all for nothing. So packaging is very complicated, and it's something to think about early on in the process. So on the next slide, again, here's some of the finished product. And I guess just in saying, in a lot of what I've said, maybe there's a lot of negative things or challenges that I've spoke about, but each of those challenges is a problem to solve, and it is actually really fulfilling figuring these things out. When at the time you realize there's a problem and you realize that, for instance, with the Amicus, we got almost to the finish line. We did our packaging and we did our packaging tests where we roll it down, roll the box down the stairs and drop it off the forklift and do the things we normally do to make sure our packaging is good. We realized that the joint connection really wasn't strong enough. It wasn't holding up. So we kind of had to go back quite a ways and make some redesigns to it. But in the end, we solved the problem and we arrived at a better design, and the fulfillment out of fixing the problem outweighed the kind of the downer of realizing the problem. So launching any product, it's kind of like giving birth to a new product it's a rocky road. There's a lot of highs, there's a lot of lows, but you just got to keep at it, solve one problem at a time. And when you get to the end and you see these products go out into the real world, it's never gets old. And it's incredibly fulfilling to see all of that effort and all of those choices and all of those problems solved result in something beautiful that people enjoy. So that's it for me. I hope you guys have some good questions. And as Brett said, we're available if you ever want to reach out to us directly.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing that beautiful presentation. We're going to turn over to Q&A from the audience. Before I jump into those, Nick, I'm seeing some samples in the background. I would love a show and tell.
Okay, I'm tethered a little bit, but I can show you a few things. This is the medium size, the 16. Still a prototype if it's still up here. The hub design changed a lot. This is the integrated version. And the finish changed. There's a lot of things to actually improve since this one. And over here, some of the first powder coated trials. So we're actually offering this in a powder coat now. That actually worked out pretty well. And then that first little sad test that really looks like, you know, very terribly crude, small little thing, was sort of for me like the very beginning of the form generation for the amethyst. And then yeah, that other pattern that didn't make it. So having these objects around in this space still is really beneficial for our process up here.
Absolutely, and it's great to see physical samples and examples of taking it from that initial prototype to the final product. So thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
First question that we have from the students. Would you advise students to work for someone else first, or is it okay to jump straight into your own company?
It's a great question. And I think any of us could answer it well, and probably similarly. It's always good to get experience under someone else. And whether it's a good mentor or a bad mentor, there will be a ton of lessons to take away from that, and just hands-on experience. Daniel, Nick, and I all had it. We didn't just go from school into starting a business. We all worked in the real world, if you will, for several years before starting. We're all better for it. I 100% know that. So I would encourage everyone to seek out a good mentorship if you can.
And consider it part of your education. You know, I see a lot of people put all this money and effort into school, and then their first job they go into, you know, thinking, not realizing that's an extension of their education. So pick something that gets you closer to what you want to do, even if it's not the best job, maybe it's not the highest paying job, but if it gets you that exposure, it is incredibly valuable. There's absolutely no way we would have been able to do this without the first jobs that we had.
Yeah, I agree.
Absolutely. There are so many different roles that you've talked about throughout this presentation. Did you start off doing all of them between the three of you? It sounds like the company has really grown. When did you realize you would need to hire other people who specialized in those roles?
That's a really good question, and I think Daniel, you can answer it well too. But it's when you build something, and to the first part, you do every part of the process. It's hard to know when to give parts of that process up, but knowing when to is key to being able to actually scale. I don't know, Daniel, if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, it's very, it is very difficult. I'd say though that doing it yourself first is extremely valuable, so that you truly understand it, helps you hire the right person, helps you keep, you know, basically guide that person and manage that person better. So, but knowing when to let go. For us, it was once there was, you know, there's a little bit of a leap of faith. I can't say we always had the revenue already to justify, but we could see that it was working and it was likely to materialize. So you have to take a little bit of a leap of faith. But you know, when you know there's a market, you know it's working, and you realize that you're being held back because you don't have enough time to do everything, or you're too scattered. That's kind of the best indicator I can have, but it is always scary. And
it never goes away. I mean, we're still 12 years in, we still have those conversations all the time.
Yeah.
Right. This question is for Nick. Do you have any suggestions for how you know when to stop designing? Is it deadline driven? Do you rely on others' feedback, or is it something you've learned to do on your own?
It's definitely a big part of the collaborative process. I mean, in one way, you never stop designing, as in constantly try different things out, and just go for it. And don't be afraid to do a ton of that. But then as far as when we actually stopped designing, like that third pattern that turned out to be not the one we wanted to go with, that was a huge conversation with the three of us. That was a big collaborative, long discussion about when we need to stop and why. That definitely involves all the disciplines.
I would just say you only have so much bandwidth. So if you're spending too much time on one product, you're preventing the next one from getting put into the pipeline and made. So yeah, it needs to be balanced.
Yeah, so there definitely is a deadline component at times in that way. We do have goals, and so yeah.
That makes sense. Could you tell us a little bit more about the collaboration process between design and engineering? How do you work it out if the design team wants something, but engineering pushes back? And do you have an example of this compromise?
Either one of you, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say that's, I think, one of our biggest strengths. I think we do the best, and that comes to just, we've been doing it for so long with each other, and we have an understanding of each other's worlds. So I think you don't want it to be, it's still a collaboration. It's not like engineering versus design. You realize engineers are designers and designers are engineers, and it all overlaps. So just trying to empathize with the other side and have kind of that open mind about it. But yeah, I mean, an example, I mean, it's happening all the time. I mean, specific to the Amicus, I'd say there's definitely material finishes is a great example where we want to offer, more materials or more sizes. And I'm just saying we just can't, we don't have the resources to put towards managing all those SKUs and developing all of that. Or another, I mean, a good example, Nick, a good one you can think of, classic compromise.
Oh yeah, I mean, on the Amicus, I mean, the way that it's kind of put together, the way the seam kind of gets stitched together, I had fairly early on figured out a certain way, and it didn't pass the test eventually when we actually started packaging and having other people build it. It wasn't, there was a ton of problems with it, and they kind of inherited that. Like, we look at this thing and say it's beautiful, and then you look really closely and see, oh, there's a lot more to be figured out, and so that, and then how do we fix that? How do we change the way that happens? And I get sensitive about that compromising the way it's going to look. And Dan's really adamant about making sure the thing's going to be strong and be able to make it there, shipping wise.
Absolutely. On the topic of that seam, we have a question about what was the resolution for the seam?
Dan, you should take that because you actually kind of figured out the final version.
Yeah, so all the pieces, each piece, there's holes in one side of the panel, and there's a little kind of flexible finger that's cut as the piece is cut, and that finger is kind of bent around and hooks through the hole in the next one and stitches it together. And originally it was just a simple straight piece that would just get hooked over, but if you squeeze the shade from the outside, sometimes those hooks could fall out. So we figured out to make it kind of a key hole shape, so the tab actually gets pushed through, and then it gets twisted slightly so it can't pull back out. And that's a great compromise example where the first design with the finger just going through the hole and bent back, it is cleaner. If you look, get your microscope out, it is cleaner. It's smoother. There's less visual noise going on. But the new design, yeah, it doesn't look quite as good if you look really close, but it makes it so it's basically you cannot get it apart. So that's where reality wins, and we chose the thing that is, maybe it doesn't look quite as good, but it's gonna get there in one piece.
Great. From the design process to the supply chain to business model, what is the balance between having a successful business model versus solving solutions like sustainability of products?
There's a lot to unpack in that question. It's a good question, touching on a lot of, different parts of the business. But as we said earlier, I think regarding sustainability, if you can cook it into your model from day one, which is very doable, I think it's extremely important, and it's for future. What part of it was it of the business model? Was that the question? What part of sustainability?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah.
That's how I understood it.
Okay. At the very beginning for us, our process was inherently very sustainable because of how vertically integrated we were. So we were really fortunate for that. Had we been designing something here and getting it shipped to us from another part of the world, that would be inherently very unsustainable. Also problematic for a million other reasons. So for us, it is very interwoven and kind of part of it from day one. But yeah, it's a balancing act. You gotta kind of, the business needs to go on, so you can't divert all attention from what you're doing to become a carbon net neutral or zero company without kind of ramping up to that. There's a lot of examples of companies that are doing incredible jobs, and I really believe it's not just marketing, are stewards of the environment. I think we're doing well, and I think we can do better, and we'll continue to drive towards that over, hopefully the next few decades.
This is a question for Dan. If you are a designer without any engineering background, what qualities, education, or experience should you look for in hiring an engineer?
That open-mindedness, and in having that kind of empathy and appreciation for the design side of things is really critical. I've worked with a lot of engineers in the past that just they don't get that at all. So if you tell them the reason we're doing something this way is because it looks better, even though it might not be as strong or as inexpensive, that just doesn't compute for some people. So someone who has a basic appreciation for design, or just a general open mind where they're gonna just listen and not just be so logical that they just can't comprehend some of the less logical parts of being creative.
Makes sense. How did you go from separate interests that each of you have and specialties to deciding to create lighting?
The lighting portion of it was largely a product of the times. We all appreciated design. We all loved building things. We loved being part of the process and having that at our fingertips, and kind of the instant satisfaction, not instant, but gratification you get when you actually build something. But Daniel, who is a voracious reader of all things, but was really tuned into where LEDs were at, and they had just become high enough quality to be well suited for high-end lighting. So that's really what drove us towards lighting and LEDs. I would also say, Nick's experience as an architect, in specifying lighting, he frequently found himself frustrated with the lack of options. So it was kind of those two powers at B, and one being somewhat lucky that this technology was being disrupted at that time, and saying, here's an opportunity. And just, it's more difficult than building a lot of other things because there is science and it requires engineering. So the barriers to entry were a little bit higher. So, I think we were attracted to the challenge part of it as well, and knowing that at that time, it's a pretty competitive, saturated market, in my opinion. Right now, it was much less. So all those things kind of worked to come together, and lighting's it's fun because it very much bridges the gap between, whatever cliche you want to use, form and function. We talk about the utility of our lights almost as much as we talk about the design of our lights. So they are here to serve a purpose and a function, which is illuminate a space. So that's really fun, and I think drew us all to lighting, kind of that combination between science, design, utility. You don't get that with some of the other things in our part of the design industry, like you do with lighting. I don't know if Daniel or Nick, if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, that sums it up.
Great, thank you. When you design custom fixtures and approach those types of projects, do you design based off of the amount of lighting that that space requires, or just aesthetics, or what is the process there?
Daniel or Nick, either.
For a custom fixture, I mean, if we're doing a custom thing for a client, they will really inform us about what the objective is, and it's something we try to have a long checklist of information to collect. But we ask them what is the lumen output you're looking for, and what's the. We actually are able to create IES files internally and like show designers how the light's going to come out of these fixtures even before we build them, even on a custom basis. So if that's important to them, but oftentimes, very frequently, it is very much aesthetically driven. But it can be one or the other, really. But it's typically a little bit of both.
Great. We are just about out of time. I apologize if we didn't get to your question today, but I do have one final question, and I'd love to hear from each of you. Dan, maybe we could start with you on any last words of advice or wisdom for the students listening today.
Just to, I guess maybe it's said a lot, especially these days, but to just keep on going, just get up and keep going. Design, a lot of emotion gets behind designs when you're trying to conceive them and trying to show them to other people, and maybe they don't like them, or you hit an obstacle, you can't make something, and it's easy to get discouraged. And so I would just say, just learn how to brush that off and just keep going.
Absolutely. Nick, maybe we could hear from you next.
Sure. I mean, slightly specifically, but if you're designing something in 3 dimensions, spend time doing tests and building mock-ups and just actually using your hands and building things in 3D. I'm not talking about 3D modeling in the computer. I'm saying, get dirty, try, and don't feel like you have to have things fully resolved to learn something. Just go try an idea, and don't feel like the dead end is a waste of time, because it really has a good chance of turning into something down the road.
Yeah, I think two things. One, from the marketing and sales side of it, if you are a designer and you're building something, there is inherently going to be a good story in that process. And people appreciate knowing where it comes from, and that there is authenticity and originality behind that design. I think so often things are just presented as complete objects. I know for all of us, we're asking the questions: why, who, where, how that thing came to be. And I think there's a ton of value in sharing that when you bring something. And then to speak kind of to what Daniel was saying, we can look back now and our own beginnings, there were very romantic parts of it, but it was really challenging. The challenge is real, and I think it is if to not romanticize that before you get into it and be expecting it to be a challenge, but know that it is very doable. And as we spoke to earlier, that's going to continue throughout your entrepreneurial journey. Daniel and I were having a conversation today about it, about how much to purchase, and it was still a scary decision, and we came to a decision, and we made it. But yeah, I would just say that it's hard, but it's fun. And for us, you spoke to kind of how do the friends stay friends and all that, and I think we're as passionate as we ever were, and the challenges and everything else do keep us going, and it's still fun. I still love that I walk through a factory to get to my desk every day. That's an incredible feeling.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for sharing. Brett, Dan, Nick, I want to say a huge thank you for taking the time to give us this incredible inside look into the company.